inaugurated our afternoon. I hope you've had a great lunch, and I think we really need to give a round of applause for people who organized the lunch. It was really great.
So let's go over to English, which we'll be starting with this afternoon. We are lucky enough to start off our afternoon with Rachel Kite, who is the Vice President and Special Envoy Climate Change of the World Bank Group. Rachel is going to come on stage. She'll be taking questions too, and she's going to explain to us the challenge of reinventing new sustainable business models to tackle climate change. So Rachel, half talk and half answering questions. Big round of applause, please, for Rachel Kite.
It feels a little bit like Strictly Come Dancing. Do you have that in France? I don't know. So I've always wanted to be on it. Good afternoon, and thank you to Jerome and to the whole Total team for inviting me to be with you today. So it's been an interesting few weeks, and I know that my dear friend Christiana spoke to you this morning, and you've also heard from Professor Sachs. An interesting few weeks in that I think the whole discourse of sustainable business, or what it means for business to compete in a world where sustainability is a premium, has gone to a new level. The IPCC report, when it came out in early November, the fifth assessment report, took away any doubt that may still be there that we do need to decarbonize the economy. We must decarbonize our global economy by 2100, while we must create the jobs that we need for those who are underemployed and unemployed in places like Europe, and the jobs that the young people of the Middle East, of Africa, of Asia will need. We have to decarbonize our economy while making ourselves competitive, remaining competitive, providing the services and providing the aspiration of prosperity that people demand. We've never had to do this before. This is a completely different challenge. This is not about corporate social responsibility. This is not even about leading with a sustainable business product line. This isn't about value addition from sustainability anymore. This is about thinking through where is the profit, where is the service, what are the products, in a world where we must create jobs, build competitiveness, and decarbonize at the same time. And then China and the US, an important agreement, something that's been hard at work for over a year. Timing was probably more important for the Americans than it was for the Chinese. Interesting that the Chinese did not have any Chinese media reporting of this accord yet, but a profound agreement from a Chinese perspective, especially the commitments to zero emissions energy as part of the energy mix in China. And then the G20, sort of the G90 ganging up on the coast. A very interesting new diplomatic development. And then, of course, we all come to Paris in December next year and will agree a package deal which will have to set us on the pathway to an iterative relationship between business and government that will allow us to decarbonize. Each country will decarbonize at a different rate, on a different path, at different speeds. But the fact that that's where we're all going is scientifically not in doubt anymore. And what's also interesting is that in the last few weeks, the economics have become clearer and clearer. And I think there is now a very robust economic consensus that this doesn't have to be as expensive as perhaps we first thought it should be. Now, there are a few unknowns. It's difficult to imagine how we decarbonize in the short to medium term, i.e. up until 2050, without a perhaps more widespread embrace of nuclear technology, without a more robust conversation on carbon capture and storage than we have today, and perhaps a more robust practice of carbon capture and storage to be debated. And of course, we have to solve for storage of renewable energy so that we can take renewables into a place where they're not at the moment, which is reliable baseload, reliable underpinning of new energy economies. But with those few exceptions, the rest of the pathway is more or less known. So the challenge for business, the challenge for you, is the reinvention, the continued reinvention of Total to be a company that competes, that creates jobs, and helps your clients, helps your country, the countries in which you work, to be on that pathway to decarbonisation. It means that for organisations like mine, we have to rethink through our mission. Our mission is to eradicate poverty and to build prosperity. It's now been made very, very clear that that can only happen in a decarbonised world. And so the advice, the guidance, the lending, the technical assistance that we give our public sector and our private sector clients has to be in that context. We have been re-engineering the way we think about our business as a financial institution over the last 18 months to 2 years with quite some energy. And some of it is important for you. First of all, we, like you, internally price carbon now. We have huge fights between our economists over what discount rates we should be using, but we put a price on carbon. This inevitably throws up different conversations about the investability and the profitability of the investments we make. We are, by definition, a long-term lender. If we're investing in the energy sector in a developing country over a 20-year period, then it's material for us now, our conversations around our economic analysis. We put a climate and disaster risk screen on everything that we do, in particular in the poorest of the developing countries. Why? Because the impacts of climate change are already being felt now. And so we can lose taxpayers' money by making bad investments, everything from putting a road in the wrong place to putting a water treatment centre in a floodplain. Or we can understand how basic needs and basic development will have to be met in this, not a changing world in 2030 to 2050, in a changing world now. On Monday, we will produce a report that looks at not only scenarios under 4 degrees and 2 degrees, particularly focusing on ecosystem services and water in Latin America, MENA, and in Eastern Europe, but we'll also look at the impacts of 0.8 degrees warming, which is where we are today, on the economies of these regions. And it's frankly devastating. And that's where we are today. And remember that we have put so much pollution into the atmosphere in the 50s, 60s, 70s that we are experiencing the impacts of that today. So even if we aggressively mitigate all emissions today, we have locked in 1.5 degrees worth of warming already. We are experiencing it now, and that will shape your profitability over the next 20 years. So you will need, just as we do, to build resilience into everything you do, because we are now living with the impacts of what we did 20 to 30 years ago. So for me, what the climate crisis has done is bring some of the issues of sustainable development over the planning horizon. They're no longer things that were going to happen in a decade's time or 20 years. They're happening now. They're happening to our clients now, and we have to figure them out now. We, similarly to you, stood back a few years ago and said, well, what does this mean for us? We concluded that we neither had the time nor the capacity to do anything other than to ask ourselves, what are the least number of most important things that need to be done to put us back on a pathway to sustainability? And it doesn't take you very long, if that's the framework of your question, to come to the conclusion that we really do have to get prices right. Energy prices are not right in many of the economies in which we work. And we, of course, do not price carbon. I applaud you for what you do internally. I applaud all of the companies that are effectively pricing carbon in their internal analysis. The more transparent you can be about why you do that, how you do it, and what it throws up without revealing business confidentiality is important. Because countries around the world are looking at how to put a price on carbon, often in the teeth of interest group discussions and politics which are very difficult. We have to applaud Indonesia this week. A new president doing the most sensible thing he had to do. This was one of the least number of most important things he had to do, was to take the harmful subsidies away from fuel, the subsidies that weren't helping the poor, the subsidies that were crippling his budget, crippling the fiscal space that the Indonesian economy had, and start to get prices right in Indonesia. That will have more impact on the emissions trajectory of Indonesia than any single act that he could have done. Sometimes the best thing to do is not frame it as a climate change action, is to frame it on the need for more breathability in the cities in which we live, better equity for poor people, and access to energy provided through different systems other than fossil fuel subsidies. So we need transparency on the private sector side, and we need more and more countries to put regimes in place. There are 40 countries and 20 sub-national jurisdictions pricing carbon today, either through a market-based mechanism or through a tax, or through performance standards, or through a mix of all three. That has to become a much greater number. The good news was that at the Secretary General's Summit on Climate in September, we saw 73 countries say that they wanted to move in this direction, and we saw 1,000 companies say that this is necessary. And so now, just in the 6 weeks since September, we've been inundated with inquiries from countries that want help. In many of those countries, it would help for them to be able to sit down with your best economists and your best modelers and other companies as well, and just talk through what does the private sector need for that predictability for the long-term investment that you seek. Countries are nervous to move in this direction, but they know that they have to. We believe that the solution is not one global carbon price. We believe the solution is not one global carbon market. We think that that's unachievable. We lost that opportunity in the late 1990s. What we do believe is important, and we do believe is achievable, is a globally networked set of carbon markets or set of carbon pricing regimes, which together, hopefully over a shorter period of time than was first imagined, will start giving you a better set of prices around the world that will allow you as a global company to do better. But the fact that these prices are coming, that they will hopefully ratchet up slowly, that there will be floors and ceilings that are appropriate, are important signals for all business. Least number of most important things, once we can get prices right, is to get the investment flowing into renewable energy, get investment flowing into low-carbon transport solutions for the cities of today and tomorrow, and to get money flowing into the restoration and the preservation of landscapes, which, if we do not take care of that, while we choke off the emissions coming from energy and choke off the emissions coming from urbanization and transport, we will be left with 40, 50, 60% of global emissions coming from badly managed land, deforested land, and badly managed monocrop agriculture. So we have to take care of everything. And it is in that world, a world where climate change is now affecting profitability in every sector of industry, or will affect profitability in every sector of industry, that is the world in which you will lead. You have led up to now. Global gas flaring, setting internal prices on carbon, leading through IPECA, setting standards, being a company that understands that the environment and social performance is linked to the long-term financial performance of your company and your projects. Understanding that consultation and the way in which you work with disadvantaged communities in poor countries is the way in which your brand will be enhanced and valued. You've led up to now. What I'm telling you is that leading going forward will be all of that, but in a world where we must face a different economic challenge, to continue to create jobs, to continue to take gas to power in northern Uganda, to do difficult things like that, but to do it while constantly decarbonising at the city level, at the national level, and at the global level. We will need every ounce of intellect in companies like Total. We will need the oil and gas industry. But together, we think we can do it. We think the economics are clear. We think the science is compelling. We think the politics are difficult. But that's not something that we can't do together. Thank you. I will take any questions.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Just time for one or two questions. Anybody have a question for Rachel? They were always very shy at the beginning, then there was always about 20 people afterwards who put their hand up. Yes, well, here we are, right. Could you just briefly tell us who you are?
Yes. Pedro Abrantes, CO2 track. How can you help us with the financial problem for small companies to set up new solutions?
Small companies in your supply chain? So I think there's two things. One is that there are many different models now of how global companies can foster small, medium-sized enterprises in their supply chains. Everything from procurement models to actually, financing and engendering incubators, working with local communities, working with local leaders, with municipal leaders in the countries in which you work. And the International Finance Corporation, where I used to work within the World Bank Group, has got a long history of establishing quite some success, often with companies, in the extractive sector of different kinds, where you're making a long-term commitment to a country, you're making a long-term commitment to a community. Everything from even diversifying those entrepreneurs and those SMEs to make sure that you're recognizing that most micro-enterprises and small enterprises are actually run by women, and making sure that you're not, as you push through efforts, distorting what is actually going on in the local economy already. We can link that up to the more than 750 financial companies that are partners of the IFC, who have from the IFC credit lines specifically for investment in women-owned businesses or women or small, medium-sized enterprises in general, or who know how to build what we call linkages, so the ability to meet the standards to be able to operate in your supply chain. So that technical assistance of what would it take to not only be a small business, but to be able to operate at a standard of responsibility that you would need so that you gain consistency of product and quality, that we can do. I think there's one other thing, which is that there is extraordinary amounts, as you know, of, especially in Africa, local equity now, which is, I think, where a lot of the dynamism is. And so working with local investors, working with local banks, with local microequity and private equity, there is, I think, an opportunity to work not just in your supply chain, but with your partners to do something a little bit more meaningful.
Right, just time for one quick more question, Rachel.
Yes, hi, Sophie de Richecourt from New Energies. Which kind of projects are you financing in renewables?
So we have grown our renewables to be, I mean, on the public sector side now, renewables account for almost 80 to 85% of what we do. And then you have to take into account our investments in distribution and transmission as well. So we've gone from being a fossil fuel funder to being a renewable funder over a very short period of time. We do everything from concentrated solar power in Morocco to off-grid lighting solutions, building the market for small, medium-sized enterprises with like renewable LEDs in Africa, through to off-grid and grid-connected solar in the Philippines and India and elsewhere, through to wind, often doing the first wind to grid-connected wind in a market. We tried that in Mexico, we've done that in the Dominican Republic, northeast Brazil, to geothermal, where we can provide not only debt and equity, but also using our relationship with government, we can also work with guarantees on the government side, which make the deals more attractive. So we've had a long track record of geothermal in the Philippines, now in Kenya, etc. So we are invested, and then of course in hydro, everything from nano hydro all the way to the really big hydro. So we are, I think, the only multilateral that is heavily invested in every sector of the renewables market, and both on-grid and off-grid. The challenge for us will be to use concessional finance to move renewable energy faster in markets where it's not moving fast enough, and to move quicker than we would be able to do otherwise. So in particular in Africa, where the cost of renewables is still very high, what can we do using using concessional finance as well as our own commercial finance, using our own technical assistance together with partners? How can we make this transition go faster?
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rachel. We could have listened to you for a lot longer time, but we've got a very tight schedule. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks very much indeed for being with us here today, and see you on Strictly Come Dancing one of these days, I'm sure.